This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by our very own Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign, and we're very pleased to say that the book is now available for pre-order on the Ghostfire Games web store.
Once we finished shipping out all of our Kickstarter pledges, we will be delivering the book to everybody who pre-orders it. So if you missed the chance to jump in on our Kickstarter, there's still the opportunity to get your hands on this book that we have worked very hard to bring to life.
A big thank you to all of our backers for making this campaign such a wild success. Thanks to the success of the campaign, we've been able to order some extra copies that we can make available for retail sales, so now is your chance to secure these, because with some of these extra bundles, we don't know how long we're going to be able to keep them in print. So if you do want to get any of the amazing miniatures, maps, or other accessories that we were able to produce for this campaign, now is your chance to make sure you get your hands on it.
So check the links below or head to Drakkenheim.com to grab your pre-order of the campaign module Dungeons of Drakkenheim now. And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin, and
we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for GMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we're taking our first look review at Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, the latest supplement to come out for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now, our physical copies are still in the mail, thanks Canada Post, but we are able to make a review based on the digital version on D&D Beyond.
This book follows on the path of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and Volo's Guide to Monsters, but this time with a very heavy focus on dragons. So if you were hoping to set out on some dragony adventures or bring some dragon-like player characters into the game, there's a lot of content here for draconic lore, adventures, and characters.
If you're a D&D player expecting another book like Xanathar's Guide to Everything or Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that is packed with subclasses, spells, feats, and new player options, this book is not what you are looking for. In many ways, this is a much more Dungeon Master focused book that I would say is closer to a build-your-own adventure book. In many respects, its focus on dragons gives us so many inspirational pieces of content for Dungeon Masters that are looking to homebrew and build their own campaigns, but looking for lots of material that they can use in that way. If you're hoping that this book is going to give you new options for your next character, you're probably going to be disappointed unless you're planning on playing a Dragonborn Ranger.
With the lore sections, the options for Lairs, and the new dragons that are being represented, those take up a majority of the book, while the subclasses, feats, spells, and magic items take up a much smaller portion. If you are a collector who's looking to expand your library, then by all means grab this book, whether you're a player or a DM. But if you're on the fence of whether you should purchase this book, if you are a dungeon master, specifically one looking to add more dragons into your campaign, or perhaps design an entire campaign around hunting, finding, and slaying dragons, or working with a different group of dragons while slaying another group of dragons, the more dragons you're hoping to fit into your campaign, the more that this book is the right choice for you to pick up.
I would even say there's so much material for campaigns in this book that you will have difficulty using all of it, even if you were running a campaign that was about slaying dragons. There's a lot of great material in here, but ultimately at the end of the day, this is a book for Dungeon Masters with just a smattering of player content. Even though we've likened it to Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and Volo's Guide to Monsters, I would say it's much closer to the Ravnica and Theros books, in that, like those books, it introduced 2 subclasses and a handful of player options like races, but the bulk of the book is on building adventures in a particular setting. In this case, it is largely setting neutral, although the book does discuss various settings from D&D's canon, such as Krynn, Eberron, the Forgotten Realms, and how dragons fit into these worlds in different ways. So if you are actually a fan of Dragonlance, I think there's actually a lot of great nods here, of course, because Fizban is a manifestation of Bahamut in Dragonlance. So in that respect, this is almost like a campaign setting book, but a campaign setting book that is about dragons.
So let's get into the meat of this book. Let's break it down by the different sections that the book offers, and Monty and I are going to do an overview of our thoughts on each of the sections. We won't get into the gritty details on everything, but just our main thoughts and things that really stood out to us.
So the book begins with a wonderful creation myth telling about how Bahamut and Tiamat had a role in the shaping of the multiverse to begin with. The first real chapter, though, presents a bunch of the new player options, including new takes on the Dragonborn, 2 new subclasses, one for the monk, one for the ranger, as well as 3 new feats.
The second chapter on draconic magic introduces 7 new spells and about a dozen or so new magic items as well.
The third chapter is all about dragons in play. It kicks off with some really amazing tables to give more character to how you describe dragons, choose their mannerisms, their motivations, and their goals, and different ways that you can use dragons in your adventures. Whether they are foes or patrons of your party, how they fit into your world, and a lot of things to think about when you're using dragons in actual games of D&D, beyond just big monsters for your players to fight, although that is very much emphasized.
Chapter 4 introduces Lairs and Hordes, which details different environmental effects and layer effects that you can put in to your dragon's lairs, as well as how to build up their hordes.
Now, this information that is presented in Chapter 4 is actually put into practice in Chapter 5, which is the Draconomicon. The Draconomicon goes through 20 different types of dragons. The 5 classic chromatic and metallic dragons, as well as the gem dragons, and several new types of dragons like deep dragons and such. And it presents the dragon's lair with new options for specific lair options for those dragons in their lairs, and really is incredibly rich and detailed with tons of adventure hook ideas and great maps of the lairs.
A lot of the lairs presented in this chapter are so detailed that if you were designing your own homebrew campaign or running a dragon one-shot, you could grab these right off the page and pop them in and just run them as is.
By far and away, probably my favorite section of the book, definitely the meatiest content, and almost every page in this entry has something that you can use in your game, depending on how you're running those dragons. Of course, because it's 20 different entries, one for every different type of dragon, you really have to have a dragon slaying campaign to use all of this in one campaign. But I think that the fact that, if you just wanted to do a game that was, hey players, you're going to go slay one of each of the 5 chromatic dragons, you have your entire campaign right here.
Chapter 6 is the Bestiary, which includes stat blocks for 80 different monsters, all of which are dragons or draconic in nature. There's a lot of really cool options. Not only do you get your chromatic and gem and metallic dragons in here, you get some really unique entries like different versions of undead dragons, ghost dragons, the Moonstone dragon, the Elder Brain dragon. There are so many cool options in here that no matter what type of campaign you're running and who your enemies are, I'm sure you can find a dragon to throw in there as well.
There's also lots of stat blocks for dragons minions and dragon worshippers. So there's a few humanoid NPC stat blocks in here as well as stat blocks for dragon-like creatures like half-dragons and the Dragonlance Draconians. So overall, the challenge rating span in this book goes all the way from challenge rating 1/8 to challenge rating 30. You also have the Great Worm dragons and the aspects of Tiamat and Bahamut. So you've got everything here from the minions of dragons all the way up to the world-shaking boss monsters, who are pretty impressive stat blocks, I have to say. Putting it all on the table, that's what you'll find in this book. So Kelly, what were your highlights, though, looking through it? What were the things that really stuck out to you as you read through it?
Well, first of all, when reading through the player content section, I think that the gem dragons are really compelling as a dragonborn race. There's some really awesome ideas here, like the dragons being able to use psychic or force damage as their breath weapons, as well as the gem dragons have an option to gain a flying speed at 5th level. Even the metallic and chromatic dragons have some really compelling new ideas in there. So if you're thinking of playing a Dragonborn, I thought that those were really compelling ideas.
Yeah, what they've done with all the Dragonborn is they've revisited the Dragonborn that was in the player's handbook. So these 3 Dragonborn, gem, chromatic, and metallic, are different from the original PHB Dragonborn, in that they can use their breath weapon a number of times per day equal to their proficiency modifier, and the damage die of the breath weapon is now a D10 that rises each tier, and each Dragonborn type has some sort of extra power. Like the Gem Dragonborn, as Kelly said, can fly and send telepathic messages, whereas the Metallic Dragonborn gain an extra type of breath weapon that they can use once per day.
The subclasses presented here, for the Ranger and the Monk, are really compelling options that really advertise the theme of Draconic. We'll get into, I think, more details of that when we actually rank them, but I do think that they were both very on brand for what this book was presenting.
Well, I do think they're on brand. I think that the Drake Warden Ranger is a great reimagining of a Beastmaster, and I would actually like to see more of this in the future. The Drake Warden is basically a specialized Beastmaster that has a draconic pet. And it made me think that we could see a trend with future iterations of the Ranger where instead of having a generic Beastmaster, maybe we get a Falconer. Maybe we get a Pack Lord that has wolves. Maybe we have like a Bear Master, or like essentially instead of having a generic animal companion, a very focused one. And I think that that's a cool take. I also think this is a pretty strong subclass overall for Rangers. I think that the Way of the Ascendant Dragon, my first read of it, it follows the trend of monks not getting strong subclasses in general.
Is it my least favorite monk subclass? No. Is it my favorite? No. But we'll get into that later.
Yeah, which is really disappointing because this could have been an opportunity for like a Bruce Lee Enter the Dragon style subclass, but I don't think we're going to get that in this one. The feats are pretty forgettable, I have to say. Nothing really shocked me about them. It was odd, actually, that there's feats in this book because there's also a section on draconic gifts that are alternative rewards that you can give out instead of magic items. And it felt like the book wasn't sure whether these should be feats or draconic gifts.
Yeah, I feel like the feats and gifts could all have been grouped together, and we should just treat feats as gifts sometimes anyway.
Yeah, because the book actually says you can give out feats as a draconic gift instead. So the draconic gifts are kind of balanced as if they are feats, which is strange, but they're cool. In the mix of the other rewards, there's some really cool magic items in here.
Mainly, I love that we've included a belt for monks that actually does some really awesome stuff for monks, and I'm glad to see a magic item that's saying, "Hey, monks, you get one too."
We finally have a magic bow that isn't an oath bow. It's a pretty basic bow. It just does an extra d6 of elemental damage. But hey, we finally have another magic bow in D&D 5e.
My absolute favorite magic item, though, has got to be the potion.
Yes.
It's a potion that when you drink it, I believe it's a legendary potion.
Yes.
But it turns you into an adult dragon. You still keep your personality and your alignment and all of that, so you get to just be you as a dragon. So all those people wishing that they could turn into dragons more often, there's a potion for that.
There's a ruby gem magic item that's also legendary that lets you choose one spell of your choice from any class spell list and add that to your spells known. So you could have like a cleric with wish or a wizard with healing word if you have this magic item. Pretty potent. There's also the horde magic items, which are really strangely presented despite being a really creative idea. When I first read this section, I thought, oh, these are magic items that level up with the player characters and grow in power. But that's not what they are. They're magic items that if you leave them in a dragon's horde for a year, they rise in power to match the dragon that lived there. And it's really not clear, like, if you find this item in a young dragon's lair and then go slay an ancient dragon, how it levels, like, does it level up? It's not clearly presented, but the idea is cool.
There is text in there that advertises that the process of it gaining power is sped up by the slaying of a dragon. So I would kind of just get rid of the math altogether. It says like, oh, it speeds it up and now it takes this long instead of this long. I would almost do it like a Skyrim sort of thing where you kill the dragon and the weapon absorbs its power.
Yeah, and then
gains a level.
Exactly. The only thing I will say is that, again, super creative idea, but the execution here is a little lacking because there is a weapon. And the weapon is the most boring and obvious implementation of this rule set that you could possibly have, in that it's a weapon that gets a +1 based on how powerful the dragon was that it slew. And then it also gets an extra d6 of damage, and then it lets you do a breath weapon once per day. So it's the most obvious way to do it, but I guess in doing the most obvious way, it shows a framework for how to homebrew your own. So, you know, sometimes you have to balance out like doing the creative thing with doing the obvious thing, especially because ultimately I do think that this is a book that is trying to encourage you to homebrew more.
And I do think even with these horde items, if you do go the route of them gaining power with the party, you're already starting to see a campaign in this book where the party starts off by slaying a young dragon and acquiring its horde items. And then they go on this quest to slay bigger and badder dragons, while their items that they've acquired early on gain more power to become powerful enough to become the ultimate dragon slayers of the realm. I feel this is all there in the book, ready for use.
Yeah. And especially once we get into the third chapter and the fourth chapter and the fifth chapter, which are much more about how to roleplay and build adventures around dragons, there is tons of amazing and really good snippets of advice. This book is table after table after table of just snippets of ideas, and kind of flipping through every page or scrolling through every page. There's something there that could inspire an adventure or an adventure hook. And it really actually has me excited for this idea of just doing that classic, the player characters are dragon slayers. There's tons of dragons. Let's just rip off the plot line of Skyrim a little bit, modify it so that it's a little bit more interesting, and go. Like, let's just have a campaign about killing as many dragons as we can. You could do that with this book.
Yeah, and I think that there's some really cool ideas here about, like, you join the metallic dragons in a quest to rid the world of the rise of chromatic dragons. You have Tiamat in there. There's so many ways that you could go with this into a dragon slaying campaign. And I think that although Monty and I both love role-playing dragons, we love building adventures around dragons, and we love using them in combat, these are things that we've had a lot of practice on over the years. And even with our amount of knowledge and practice, seeing some of the stuff in this book inspired us and gave us new ways to imagine dragons. When I looked at the ways to describe dragons, I was even like, oh, this is really helpful. I could describe dragons all day, but imagining how each of the different types of dragons differs in its appearance is really nice.
I really like just there's a section in the book that has two portraits of two different dragons that they're both red dragons, but they're both different in their appearance in that one has a bunch of jewelry, one has scarves and runes all over it, and it really gets you thinking about how a dragon can be is a unique character. And even though this book does have this kind of disposability with dragons, and that ultimately you're going to kill a bunch of them, it also balances that out by saying dragons can be patrons, they can be schemers, they can be gods, they can be emperors. So overall, even though I think the most exciting thing that this book presents is the Dragon Slayer campaign, it presents that in a way that's like, here's your Dragon Slayer campaign with this subtext of like a dragon faction intrigue as well happening. And it reminds me of a previous third edition book that actually had this notion of the dragons playing the great game. One of these ideas that I was reminded of is that dragons kind of secretly rule the world and use adventuring parties to take out their enemies. And I love this idea of a party of adventurers that are being secretly manipulated into dragons, and that dragons fight their wars with each other by recruiting adventurers.
I think that's amazing, and I have so many ideas just based on that. One thing that we actually didn't touch on, though, going back a little bit, we didn't talk about the spells.
Ah, yes.
And I think that there's only 7 spells presented in this book, but there were a few pretty cool options that stood out to me. Mainly, my favorite is the 7th level spell, the Draconic Transformation.
It's a powerful spell, too, giving you flight and blind sight, while also letting you do a cone of force damage as a bonus action. This is way better than Mordenkainen's sword.
Yeah, so it's really fun that, like, you don't need to be a dragonborn or a dragon lineage. You can be any sorcerer, wizard, or druid and just flap your arms, and there you go off into the air, breathing cones of force damage down on your enemies and seeing invisible creatures.
It is a concentration spell, but it's kind of one of those all-in-one packages, which makes it pretty potent. I also do like the 5th level Summon Draconic Spirit. This is a pretty good summon spell. It summons a large flying creature that does a good amount of damage on average between its 2 attacks and getting to do a breath weapon every turn as part of its attack routine. It also has blind sight, and because it's a large flying creature, you can summon a dragon and ride the dragon.
We said this earlier, but I want to reiterate and expand on this, that the dragon Lairs are so well developed in this book that, again, if you're designing a homebrew world to go and quest to find the 5 dragons, All that you really need to design is the stuff in between their journeys from their hometown to the great mountain where they're going to fight a red dragon in a lava lair. You just grab the lair out of the book and you have your adventure site ready to go. So in designing a campaign, I could see just designing the in-between stuff and using these as the sites that the party is going to visit to find the dragons.
And I will say that, well, many dragon stat blocks can look very much the same when you're just scanning through them. I mean, all dragons are fundamentally flying lizards that breathe some kind of element. The book does a really good job of making them diverse in that way by showing how the specific dragon pairs with its environment. Oftentimes, like, the black dragon has water as a huge obstacle in its lair. The red dragon has lava, obviously. The white dragon has lots of ice and snow around it. And then it pairs that with suggested modifications to the dragon's lair action, or even there's a section in the book with suggestions of extra abilities that you can give the dragon, and even abilities that you can give its minions too. All of these together mean that, yes, this book presents a lot of adventure ideas, but there's a lot of crunch here that you can customize your dragons really, really well between different adventure sites. So even if you are doing that campaign where the players are fighting dragons, breaking into the lairs, it's not going to feel repetitive if you utilize the material here, because every lair and every dragon is going to feel very, very different thanks to the material in this book.
As we move on to the Bestiary, there's so many new types of dragons and different ways to imagine dragons. I love the new gem dragons. They're beautiful, and I really love what they have to offer. But on top of that, even something as simple as including a section on sea monsters really stood out to me.
The gem dragons all have a lot of unique psionic powers. They include a much more spellcasting component, and certainly, if there is one thing that I would have loved to have seen in this book a little bit of, would have been a more specific, here's how to modify the original Monster Manual dragons to bring them up to the same level as the gem dragons. I think that there's enough tools here in this book that you can certainly do that, but the new dragons presented in here certainly show their teeth a lot more than the classic Monster Manual dragons, and the inclusion of the Great Worms, these challenge rating 28, 27 monsters that just have 300-foot breath weapons that deal 90 damage, make you unconscious, are amazing. The aspect of Tiamat, I think, is not as strong as the Tiamat and Rise of Tiamat, though.
Yeah, I mean, you could do an aspect of Tiamat that leads into a full Tiamat battle, but it still is challenge rating 30.
Yeah, but the challenge rating 30 Tiamat in Rise of Tiamat is the actual Tiamat, whereas this is more like her avatar. I mean, if you're running Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, there's a ton of stuff that you can use in this book, though, overall. Like,
yeah,
you're not complaining.
This would probably make the Tyranny of Dragons campaign a lot richer if you just inject all of this into there. Yeah,
I think that this book alone, probably if you are running Tyranny of Dragons, is going to give you a lot to work with, because it does actually have a small section on the Dragon Cult. It also does have a small section on the Chamber of Eberron. So if you are running an Eberron game, I think there's a lot of cool material here for you. There just hasn't been enough support for other settings like Dragonlance. In the title alone, Fizban, the book kind of assumes that you know what Dragonlance is and what the Dragonlance setting is all about. And I've read through this, and it's been years since I've read Dragonlance, and I'm still very confused. My constructive criticism about the lore and ideas of this is, like, feels like we should have got a full Dragonlance book, because if you want to run Dragonlance, there's no currently in print books. Like, you're going to have to go to your bargain bin or the DM's Guild. If you don't already know and love Dragonlance, the sections about Dragonlance in this book are very confusing.
That's fair. I think overall, though, when we look at this book is designed for DMs who really want to design more dragon-themed adventures, campaigns, or just put more dragons in your world, or even inject them into one of the campaigns that you're already running. If you're running one of the pre-written modules but think it could use more dragons, then sure. Once your DM picks this up, it has the spattering of player options that I think you could present to your players. If you're a collector of the books and you don't really care if it's mostly DM focused, then pick it up anyway, but you're going to find the section for players much smaller. That being said, What this book offers somebody who is excited about dragons is really compelling. I think that what we get here is something that I actually want to see more of for other monster groups. If we had a book of this for undead, a book like this for orcs and goblins, a book like this for mind flayers, that just kind of was an entire book dedicated to how to bring these different creatures to life, how to build their lairs, how to build entire adventures, new ways of using them and looking at them and describing them, new spells, magic items, feats, and player options that advertise a world where the main thing you're dealing with is this type of creature. I love this idea, and I think that this book does such a good job of inspiring creative gameplay for DMs to imagine a world filled with dragons.
If you loved Volo's Guide to Monsters and you were inspired by the material in that book and you want a whole book that is that, but all about dragons, you will love and get a ton of use out of this book. If you run a D&D campaign world where dragons are super rare, or where they're non-existent, or where you want them to be these kind of larger-than-life, eldritch, godlike figures that are beyond mortal comprehension, which is a completely valid way to run dragons, I don't think this book has a lot for you. If you're just not interested in dragons at all, and you like other types of monsters, and you particularly prefer a not super high fantasy campaign, because I think a lot of this material is very high fantasy oriented, you might be able to skip this one.
Regardless, it is full of so many new monsters with 80 different stat blocks. There is a lot in here. So it's hard to justify picking up the book just because you want to add the Mind Flayer dragon into your Illithid campaign.
Yeah.
But it's there. So if you do pick up this book, there is a lot of content to explore, to absorb, and to inspire. So grab it if you're into dragons or if you just need some more dragons in your life.
I would honestly say that this is one of the highest quality books in terms of quality content and material for Dungeon Masters that has been put out for 5th edition. It is really, really strong conceptually, and I hope we get more books of this level of quality. Even though it is a specialized book, it is a fantastic one. And in that respect, maybe if you aren't interested in the material in it, this book might change your mind. It's so good.
So this has been our first look at Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. Tell us what your thoughts on this book are in the comments below.
Over the coming weeks, we're going to go more in-depth about the player content in this book. In the meantime, if you want to talk to us about that, you can join our Patreon community. We have had a great chat going on our patron-only Discord right now about Fizbans and the new books as they come out. It's a great place for people to share ideas, gave us lots of thoughts to chew on for this episode as well. And so if you enjoy the work that we do here and want to chat with us, consider becoming a patron of our show. We are so grateful to our patrons for their ongoing support. They make it possible for us to do these videos. You can find out all about that in the description below.
And don't forget to check out our live play Shadows of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes of that show right up over here.
And we've got plenty more coverage on all the 5th edition materials right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.